right, my name is John Landis. I'm with the Turner Foundation, and I'm here today interviewing Jim Kincaid. We are at his home on 761 Basswood Drive, and it is Friday, November 8th, 2019. This is being filmed by Rod Hatfield with Hatch New Media. So Jim, I'd like you to tell us where you were born and when, and then we want to talk a little bit about your life.
Okay. Born in Cincinnati, 1933. And what was the other question? One question at a time.
We take off from there. You were just telling us a little
Okay.
bit about your
Okay.
father making a trip.
Well, that was it. My mother, it was Christ Hospital, and I was the youngest of four. And my father was playing at a theater somewhere in northern Kentucky, and got the word that my mother was in labor, and frantically got in his car and raced back to Cincinnati and ran off the road into a creek bed and tore the bumper off the car. That's the only story I remember, and then backed it up and left the bumper there and came back on and made it to the hospital before I was born, I think. So that's the birth story. And we lived in Cincinnati on North College Hill, or Mount Airy, I guess it was. And then we lived there not very long. My dad was, that was 1933. And he was appearing on broadcasting on WLW radio. And he used the radio to tell people where he was going to be appearing, because mostly at that time you were playing double bills with movies and a stage show, like the Regent Theater in Springfield. Checkers told me that my dad had the highest attendance record of any stage show that played there in the 30s. So people were lined up all the way around the block. So that was interesting. My dad, if you want to go back to my dad's start, he was educated to the 4th grade in the great state of Kentucky. And school was only after the crops were harvested in the fall and before the spring planting. So he would walk up a dry creek bed to go to school. And amazing the things they learned, because he could still recite poetry that he learned then, 60, 70 years later. And he grew up his father was a sharecropper, and he grew up planting tobacco and whatever, and he had no plans, and he had nothing in mind. And a friend named Jim Ralston, you've heard of the Ralston Purina Company. Well, this is way back when, before the Ralston Purina Company. But Jim was a friend, and there was a camp meeting going on, a little church, a little east of Point Leavell, Kentucky, where my dad was born. And so he and my dad went there. And of course, the idea was to chase girls there, stay out in the parking lot with the buggies and horses and chase the women around and find girls. But Jim Ralston was a little more serious-minded. He says, Bradley, said, you need to get with it. You need to go down in that church and get up to that altar. And so my dad did. And the story, he says, is the lights came on for Bradley Kincaid. He really did. Jesus did a work in his life. And he walked from there to Berea, Kentucky, Berea College, and Berea Academy, and he enrolled in school in the 5th grade, and he was 19. And it was an academy, and he wasn't the only kid there that was older, because Berea was formed to educate Appalachian-type kids that had no other educational opportunities. So he went all the way through the academy. And my mother was his music teacher. She had graduated from Oberlin. She was 2 years younger than he was, but she was his music teacher at Berea. And they fell in love, and the rest is history. And his major goal was to be a YMCA director. And they got married, I think it was 1922, and he took a job as a YMCA director in Ashland, Kentucky. And he was doing what YMCA directors did then. And one of his stories he told me was he would take the kid. He would do kind of like Young Life does. He'd go to the schools and play his guitar and sing songs for kids, and he would recruit them to go to the YMCA summer camp. And he would take them to camp, and that was an experience for them. And one of his little campers was Foster Brooks. If you remember that name, the guy that acts like he's not sober. But Foster Brooks was one of those little kids, and my dad said he was so ornery, I had to spank him. So my mother knew that he wanted to go to college, and so they sold everything they had, and they got on the train and went to Chicago. And he enrolled in the YMCA college there, which is George Williams College. And he was singing in a men's quartet. They would go around and do banquets and things, and they got 10 cents a head and they'd be sitting up there singing, counting who's there. And one of the guys in the quartet, WLS radio had just started. It was just brand new, 1926, and they had a show called the National Barn Dance, and it came on Saturday night, and people would keep their Atwater Kent radio batteries in the icebox all week and wait for the show to come on. It was supposed to come on maybe 7, maybe it was 7:11, maybe just 20 after, maybe it's 5 minutes till. Whenever they got the show together, they threw the switch on the transmitter and the show would start. And so one of those guys told the station manager that my dad sang old folk songs and played the guitar. And so they said they'd give him $15 if he'd come down and sing a song. $15 was big money in 1926 for a college boy. And so he showed up with his guitar and he sang an old English ballad called Barbara Allen, which has 144 verses or something like that. It's really long. And he sang the song, got his $15, went back to school. And they called him a few days later, and they said they had some fan mail for him. And he said, "What's a fan?" I mean, he was new to this. And so he went down, and the post office had 4 of those big mail bags full of letters that had come in for him. And so he sang Barbara Allen on WLS Saturday night, every Saturday night for 4 years, and obviously moved into the big money area. And he graduated, with a bank account and a Stutz Bearcat and a condominium on Lakeshore Drive, and so he did pretty well. And he played theaters like the Chicago Theater and vaudeville. And then, of course, vaudeville died kind of early in the late 20s, early 30s. And they started when movies came in, talkies. So he would appear with a talkie and do his show as part of the show, and he did that for a long time. And in I think it was 1934, 35, he was asked to go to Cleveland or Canton or Akron or what it was. There was a amateur show there, and he was asked to judge the amateur show. And he went up there, and there were these 2 really young guys. One was Marshall Jones, and the other was a guy named Harmonica Joe Troyan, and they had a little act, the 2 of them. And my dad thought they were pretty good, and he was getting ready to go to New England because he thought New England needed country music or folk music. And so he asked them if they wanted to go along, and so they did. And they proceeded. They were on WBZ Boston and Schenectady, and they would do these shows. And Grandpa he wasn't Grandpa then, he was just Marshall. And he had that twangy voice, and he came out. It was time for the show to start, and he was supposed to go. He was late getting on the stage. And my dad said, "Get out here, you're worse than an old grandpa." And the moniker kind of stuck. And he gave him those big boots that he wore. And he did that twangy voice, handlebar mustache. And they did the Grandpa Act, and they did that over New England. And then they came back to Cincinnati, and my dad stayed. We moved to Garden City, Long Island, and he was on NBC New York, and WBZ Boston, I remember, and then the station in Schenectady, and then we were there till I was 6 years old, I think. And then we moved to Rochester, New York, the radio station there. Is this all interesting?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's great stuff.
Okay. So he was on WLS-AM radio there, and he opened it's called the Circle B Ranch, and he built kind of a stage and a park area, and families could come and set up their picnic lunches, and he would have all kinds of actors do stage show. Another Foster Brooks story was Foster Brooks was his announcer in Rochester, and he wore this skinny red suit, a double-breasted red suit. And he would come on, and he would do this thing, and he would do this act, and he would fall off the front of the stage. And my dad says, "I wonder he didn't kill himself." That was part of his shtick, and then he would do announcing. And I found a contract that Foster Brooks had signed to work for my dad for the whole summer for $300. And that was, I guess, okay money for him at the time. So they did that, and then we moved back to Cincinnati, WLW. And I left out the recording part. When he was on WLS, he did a lot of recording in Richmond at Gennett Records. And you can go there, and there's a Walk of Fame, and there's a big thing of him and Gene Autry and a whole bunch of other people. So he apparently was selling a lot of records in the 30s. Supposedly about 20 million records were sold. But you could never get an accounting from a record company. It was the crookedest operation you could ever imagine, because he recorded for Bluebird Records, and then the rep would leave Bluebird and go to Brunswick, and then they'd squeal on Bluebird and tell my dad how many they'd sold, and my uncle was an attorney, and they would sue Bluebird, and then Brunswick would do the same thing, and he was RCA and then Decca Records, and none of these people would give an accounting to their artists of records or so. It was just a token kind of thing. Of course, you only got like a nickel a record or something like that. So that was not a thing that my dad really, later it became, controlled, and artists were getting paid, and copyrights were being observed and so forth. But back in the 30s, it was a growth industry. Growth industry, yeah. So moved back to Cincinnati, and he was on WLW there, and we lived there till I was 12. And then he was asked to go to the Grand Ole Opry, and so we moved to Nashville, Madison, Tennessee, which is north of Nashville, on Halls Lane, which is now Old Hickory Pike, but it was Halls Lane back then, 2-lane road. And they said they didn't pay any salaries to anybody on the WSM Opry, but they had to pay him because he was a union. He was supposedly the highest salaried guy there, and I think it was like $135 a week or whatever it was. But again, he used the station to advertise where he was going to be appearing, and of course, every artist had to be there Saturday night for the Grand Ole Opry, so you couldn't schedule an appearance an off night on Saturday night. So I remember going down to Opry with him and hanging out in the studios back in the Ryman Auditorium, picking guitar with Sugarfoot Garland and guys back there like that, and so I had fun doing that.
How old would you have been during that?
Teenager, 15, 16.
Oh, yeah.
I took, I'm gonna think, who's the big recording studio guy, the guru of everything down there, had the house band at WSM Radio. He's the major recording company there. He started everybody. I'll think of it as we talk. But I took lessons there on Saturday morning, and the brother of the guy I'm trying to think of was backing my dad up in the radio program. Oh boy, senior moment here. Sorry, I'll think of it. So I took some guitar lessons for a while, and just enough to be dangerous, I guess. Not really enough to be good, but I did play when we moved back up here, and my dad got tired of it. By that time, he'd had 25 years of show business. I could tell you a grandpa story.
Okay.
When they were in New England, of course, everything was riding in a car. Grandpa was asleep in the back of the car, and they're driving and driving and driving, and finally they realized they'd made a wrong turn. And my dad stopped the car, and Grandpa woke up and he said, "What'd you stop for, And he said, "Oh, we made a wrong turn back there." And Grandpa says, "So help me, I could have told you that." They could have shot him right then, but that's a Grandpa story. So, but anyhow, when they started with the electric guitars and the drum sets and things like that on the opera, that was not my dad's kind of music. He was a folk singer, and that was not his music. And by the time he was tired of riding in the back seat of cars and traveling and wanted to be with my mother, and he'd had enough, and he bought with some other folks there stock interest in 5 radio stations, one of which was Springfield, WWSO Springfield. And he was losing money, and my dad thought, well, I've been in the radio business for 25 years now, I ought to be able to do that. So he came up, took over the station, fired the manager, and took it over, turned it around, and then he had an offer to sell it to Dayton. WAVI Dayton bought the station and the license, those are the ones things that are hard to come by. And the rest of the story, he was thinking, well, maybe you go back on radio again. So he went in the Morelli Music Store, which was in the arcade building, to buy a new guitar case because his was getting kind of shabby. And he said, I met the best salesman I ever met in my whole life. He said, he sold me the whole store. It was Frank Morelli. So my dad did not have the heart to go back on the road again. He just didn't. He was happy being home. And apparently he was well off enough that he could do it. And so he bought this music store, and he thought, well, this is great. You buy something for 50 cents and sell it for $1. So that could be better than that, That's not the way it is. But anyhow, he started there, and at that time I was in college at Oberlin, and then he bought that in February of '55, and I graduated in that following June. I had 3 years of Air Force to do. I was aircraft maintenance engineering officer by act of God and a gentleman, whatever it is, a gentleman and an officer by act of God, whatever. So I had courtesy of ROTC. So, and I met Nancy there, in Springfield. And today's kind of a special day. 2 years ago today, she passed and went to be with Jesus. So that was a time. But she had Alzheimer's and things like that, so, and a stroke, so it was good. But she was singing in the Covenant Church choir, and my sister was singing in the Covenant Church choir, and the choir had a picnic at Ed Lupfer's big farm there in New Carlisle, whatever it was. Summer there, they had a farm, whatever. And she was there, and I went with my sister. And she went, "You want to hear all this stuff?"
Yes.
Okay. She went home and told her mother. She said, "I saw the man I'm going to marry tonight." And her mother said, "Oh yeah, who's that?" She says, "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." The rest is history. You know, we got married, got together, and got married. Just started dating, and we both worked at Wren's while I was waiting to be on active duty, and so we met and dated and got serious and all that stuff. So we spent 3 years in the Air Force. That's where our daughter was born, in Valdosta, Georgia, at Moody Air Force Base there. And then we came back, and my dad gave me a job, $100 a week to work in the music store. And I had no plans, nothing to do, but that was a cut and pay for a first lieutenant, you know. But I thought, well, I thought it, so I did that. And I liked the business. I kind of liked it. And he took the time to play golf and go to his stockbroker, left me with the store, not knowing anything about business. I mean, I was a zero as far as knowing anything about business, except can you buy something for 50 cents and sell it for $1, you know. Do you want to ask some questions, or am I doing okay?
No, you're doing great.
On a roll, okay.
I'll come back. Yeah, just keep on the story, and we'll go back and I'll start. Thank you, sir.
So he left me with the store and learning by on-the-job training, and he gave me a raise after a year to $125 a week. And business was so bad, I would go home with tears in my eyes. It was terrible. Business, it was just 1961, 62 was not a good year in the music business. But I gradually caught on and started doing better, and by 1965, business was really good. Oh, I didn't tell you the rest of the when he bought the music store story. This Italian guy that sold him the store says, "I'm a sick man. I'm go to Italy and die," you know. And my dad fell for that and bought the store and told him what a wonderful business it was. And it lost money every month. My dad started it, and about 5 or 6 months later, he gets a letter from Italy from this guy. He says, "I'm feel much better now. Want to buy the store back." And mess with my dad much. And my dad said, I wrote him back, said, "I wouldn't dream of selling this gold mine." You know, sorry. So he did come back and start at a store in Bell Fountain and then one in Urbana, but back in Springfield. Okay, so we were doing well in 1965, and the business was good, and we did that for a while. In 1969, I forget why we were thinking about moving, but the mall was starting up, and parking downtown was terrible. And the bus company decided to park the buses perpendicular right in front of the music store. And there was no air conditioning in the music store. And you had to leave the front door open and the back door open so the fumes went right through the store. And we right over the Mill Run sewer, and it stunk. And so they started.
That combination.
They started the mall. They came to me about starting, opening in the mall. I had first crack at that. And we are also talking people. Steve Yanasi, you remember that name? Okay, he owned the properties there along First Street where the laundromat and the beauty shop and where the music store is now. And so we bought 4 lots from Yahanasi and built a freestanding store, thinking, we wouldn't have to pay rent. And as it turned out, it was a good decision to make, because Jim Moeller opened there in the mall, and he did very well for quite a few years. And then the organ business went south, and his stores went south, and he was left with a high rent and eventually closed. And so, but we hung on there and did okay, selling band instruments and guitars and pianos and organs for a while, and that was good. And this is in the middle 70s. In 1973, I bought my dad out.
Okay.
And I was sole owner. Okay, now where do we go? You want to ask questions, or?
Well, I'd like to ask a question. So, does he know where his music abilities came from, and all these songs that were in his head, and that kind of formed who he was? And can you talk about that, some stories and memories?
You got back in Point Leavell, Kentucky. My grandmother knew a lot of old English folk songs. Kincaids came over from Scotland in 1685 on the Sir Francis Bacon, and landed at Jamestown, and then migrated through Kentucky. And of course, all the English folk songs came with them. Mm-hmm. And she knew a lot of them, and I think she taught him to play a few chords on the guitar, and so he had a good voice. And then we went to Berea. My mother's music teacher, and he had other music teachers at Berea, and they encouraged him, keep singing, and he had the voice. And when he discovered that he could sing and make money doing it, he needed a repertoire. And so he would take these little excursions down into Kentucky, and he'd kind of set up shop in the town square and take his guitar out and start singing for people, and people would gather around and they'd say, "Do you know how such and such a song?" He said, "No." He said, "Sing it for me." So they would sing to him, and he would learn the songs, and then he would come back, and my mother would write them down, because she was a music educator, and they were sent to Congress to be copyrighted. And so he had a collection of old folk songs, and he published probably one of the very first songbooks published for folk songs that were ever published, and he sold it on WLS radio. And they started to, somebody suggested that they do this, and so they printed 10,000 copies of it, and he thought, well, I hope he didn't have to burn them, but they were sold, and 50,000 more, then 100,000 more, and people kept buying those songbooks. So he ended up publishing 13 songbooks over the last one from Nashville, 1950.
Okay.
Number 13. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, and what's interesting is they always have a story at the front that tells a little bit about him.
Mm-hmm.
There's usually a letter of him thanking his audience. So talk a little bit about what his connection was, do you think, with his audience, and why he became as popular as he did during that time.
I think that people just knew his heart was for people, and he related to people very well, and they could sense that, and he was a country boy, he was like, I think, was it during that time when the big migration from the south to the north for the industrial jobs, and so a lot of people in the north or Midwestern states were Kentucky, Tennessee people, and they just understood him, and he never lost that common touch. He was, he was always down to earth with people. He really was. It surprised me. And he had a tent show that he would take out in the summer. It was a 2,000-seat tent, and the crew would set it up, and they would have billboards through the town, and people would come to the tent show, and sometimes it would pour down rain before the box office opened, and maybe instead of 2,000, there'd be 150. And he said it was always the same show. It came 150 or 2,000. He just would talk to people. One of his big opening lines was, glad to see you. Let's talk. Let's talk. I'll tell you about my operation, and you tell me about yours. The people. So he was very folksy in his presentations. So that was good, and he never lost that touch. And he had fan mail forever, and most of those I bundled up and gave to Berea Appalachian Museum. But they loved him. They really did love him. And I would go in the music store. People would come in. I listened to your dad at 5:15 every morning, and he was my favorite singer. And people named their kids after him. Bradley Kincaid Jones, and things like that. So it was a lot of affection there. It was amazing. They never lost it.
The other thing I found interesting looking through some of the songbooks that I've been able to acquire was he always incorporated photos of your family.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see pictures of you and your siblings as they kind of
Mm-hmm.
grew up, and your mother.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously people really did have a connection. He really played
Mm-hmm.
off of that. But there was, we're just like you. We're a family, and shows them in front of the radio, which was kind of the TV at the time. So
Radios had the big green eye. Do you ever see one of those things in the front of a radio, early radios? And when you were tuned in, the eye came together. And so you'd sit there and you'd stare at that green eye. I don't know, that was so funny. That was before TV. But when my sisters were born, they were twins, and he was on WLS Chicago, and people sent all kinds of baby presents, all kinds of gifts and things like that. And I just kept asking, how are the twins? And how's my mother's name is Irma? How's Irma? They just never let up on that. It was family, and it was folksy. He was from home, and so that was part of it.
yeah, and that's really what country music kind of was all about.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that idea of your family's history with music came over from Europe, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what partly got incorporated into his early years.
That's the only explanation I have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What a great story. So, what was life for you moving around when your father had to move to these new radio stations, or just wanted to? What did that kind of mess up your life, or
Yeah,
did you enjoy
terribly. Moving every 3 or 4 years and making new friends, and it's kind of like like being a preacher's kid. People come up and say, "Oh, you're a little Jimmy, aren't you? Can you sing like your dad?" And of course, you want to say, "I can sing better than he can." but that was always the question: can you sing like your dad? And I remember that growing up. So that was not my favorite thing. And he kind of kept us out of the business. Once in a while, he would get us up, do a family program. We'd all have to sing something, and rarely, yeah.
Did your mother sing?
She was a voice and piano double major at Oberlin Conservatory, so she had a good voice and wonderful pianist, and she knew music.
Did
she
you
could
ever
sing.
do anything with him? Because it was usually just your
Just-
father and his guitar.
Just around the house.
Mm-hmm.
She had a different kind of music. And that was kind of, his music was not my music. You know, every generation has their own music, and to be crazy about folk music, I wasn't there. I was into what we had the other night, jazz and pop music, and when I was at Oberlin, I had a combo and a band at Oberlin, and we played jazz kind of stuff. Improvisation is what we did best.
And what do you play?
Guitar.
Yeah. What kind of guitar did you have back then?
Did I have?
Yeah.
I had a Gibson L4 with a DeArmond pickup on it and an old Gibson amp, my first, you know. And I got better and better with the music store. And then I didn't have my own, I just took one off the rack. Whenever I had a band all through till played my last job in 1975, New Year's Eve at Mitchell Hills Club, New Year's Eve party, but I would just take one off the rack and play it. I should have kept the first Fenders that I ever got, and even old Gibsons, but I didn't. So, my dad's guitar, that's another interesting story. My dad bought a 0045 Martin 1928, in 1928 he bought it, and he used it all this time, and it was a beautiful guitar. And when he retired, you know, I had a music store. A guy comes in the music store, wanted to know if we had any used Martins. And my dad says, "Yeah, I got one at home." And he said, so he went home and got it, brought it back, sold it to this guy for $150. And the last price I had on it, I found it. It's in a music store in Statesboro, North Carolina. $130,000. Would you like to buy it for me, John? That'd be great. I'd love to have it.
I don't even think I could loan you money for that, but
yeah,
we have to talk to the bank. Yeah, all that stuff has become so valuable.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little more because it was his, and it's not in really great shape. I got a picture of it.
Yeah. So, they didn't get to travel like many of the acts do today. So talk a little bit about what your memories are and stories of your father traveling.
Well, there's no such thing as a superhighway or an RV. Hardly ever a 4-lane highway in America then, in the 20s and 30s and 40s. So you basically were in a car, station wagon, or he had a couple of limos that for a while, that Packard and that, what was the one he ran off the hill there? 12-cylinder one, the Pierce Arrow, yeah. And but traveling was hard, and he did that for 25 years. And I knew it wore on him. He was tough, but I mean, it still wore on him. And he didn't get to be home with family a lot, you know, because of that. Or when he was home, he was pretty tired. He did the best he could. And he seemed to end up in church on Sunday morning, so that was good. But basically, he did a lot of traveling. And the traveling, he didn't work as much toward the end of his career as he did early on. Whatever reason. And of course we had a little farm there in Madison, and house is still there. Nice house, big stone house.
The same as when you were there?
Yeah, it's still there.
What was the actual address? Do you remember?
I don't know, we had 40 acres, and it's all built up behind there now, without nice houses and things like that. It's right opposite. Oh, I can't remember, John. The address. I never sent them any mail there, so. But it's a stone house. ends on it and balconies and things like that. So
Okay.
it's a nice house.
Yeah.
It doesn't look as nice as it did then. I think they enclosed the screen porch, and they didn't do a nice job of it. So I don't think it's quite the house. And next door was a big farm where they had a lot of horses, and we had some horses. And my brother married the daughter of that particular farmer, and he had a product called Hall's. It was a salve that he made in the little smokehouse there, and they put it on horses, and they were galled, like that. I can't think of the name. I thought of it earlier. So, but anyhow, that's another story. You're getting tired, aren't you, John?
No, I'm loving this. I'm just trying to think of the next.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Okay.
Downstairs, you were telling us some stories that would probably be great to capture on media about the nominations.
Okay. Okay. And he really separated himself from the Grand Ole Opry. He didn't really. He was the most highly educated person in the whole Grand Opry. Nobody had a college education, and he did, and they still don't, you know. So it was, and my mother was well educated, and so he didn't really fit with. He was not a snob. He was never that, but he wasn't really down to earth with Uncle Dave Macon and his son, whoever his name was. So he really walked away from Grand Ole Opry there. He didn't have to, but he did. And but he was nominated. He won nomination, awarded the country music writers Hall of Fame. So he's part of that. And then he retired in 1950, and I think 1984 people hadn't totally forgotten him yet, but he was nominated to be in the Country Music Hall of Fame. And so he showed up for that. He went down there, and they nominate 2 every year, and they elect 1. And so my dad hadn't worked for 34 years, and so it was my dad or Johnny Cash. And so Johnny Cash was the nominee. So my dad came back. He was kind of disappointed, made all that trip and didn't do anything. So a few years went by, and he was nominated again. And this time he had a mild heart attack, and he wasn't well. And I talked to the woman from the Country Music Hall of Fame that had contacted me, and I told him, said, is this for real, or my dad's really not that well to make that trip, although he probably would, if he were going to receive the nomination. And I said, is he or is he not? She says, well, I'm not supposed to say, but no, he's not. And at this time it was my dad and Roy Rogers, who was still working and making movies and whatever. So that, he's a nominee but never elected to the Country Music Hall of Fame. Although you walk through there, and he's mentioned a few times, especially with Grandpa Jones and places like people like that. But they did open this. You weren't familiar with this Kentucky Music Hall of Fame in Renfro Valley. Renfro Valley was a big deal back in the National Barn Dance days of WLS. Would have country shows there, and so they remodeled a stable there. It's beautiful, and it's done like it's a real museum, and each person has a glass encased with some of their memorabilia from it, and everybody famous that ever was born in Kentucky is kind of down in there, and his sign's on the highway. If you can pull off and go in there, so next time you drive down I-75, pull off and go in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm not sure they enjoy this kind of business that they do in Nashville, Country Music Hall of Fame. But it's interesting to see, you know, Merle Travis and my dad and the Everly Brothers. And Everly Brothers did my dad a big favor. There's an old railroad song that my dad copyrighted called The Wreck of the Old 97. And the Everly Brothers recorded that on an album with a whole bunch of other stuff. And my dad opened it, he would get checks regularly from BMI. And he opened his mail and there was a check for like $1,100 or something. And he said, And it was from this recording that the Everly Brothers had made. And it went all the way around the world. And he kept getting royalties from their recording. So that was a good deal. But they're in that thing and a whole bunch of other folks. So.
Were there any other artists that recorded some of his music?
Well, I think Grandpa did. Yeah, Grandpa liked my dad's music and learned a lot of it. Mm-hmm. But Grandpa's not a big record seller, but he's some.
He was a TV personality.
He was, yeah. Yeah. Hee-haw. And he wrote, you know, he wrote a book. You ever see his book, Everybody's Grandpa? Well, before you leave, I'll loan you a copy of it. And he's got a nice endorsement to my dad, and he writes about this episode in New England and how important my dad was to him back then. So that was good. So don't even forget, I'll loan. You're capable of lending and returning, right?
I am.
Okay.
I am. So tell me, too, about your siblings. Did any of them have any interest in doing what your father did or following in his footsteps? Did you have any of those interests?
My brother, I have a brother and two sisters.
Yeah.
Not a bit.
Yeah.
I think maybe we were all turned off, you know.
You were so close to it.
Yeah, too close to it. You can be too close to it.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not. My brother ended up in business in Nashville. He had a AAA communication business, and he was in the early part of CB radios, and he had put up a lot of towers from Nashville and Murfreesboro and would have antennas where CB radios would be broadcast from. And of course, CB radios died and cell phones come in, so all the cell phone people wanted to use his towers, so he did pretty well leasing space on his towers. And he even had one on the top of one of the big buildings downtown. The Bat Building?
Yeah, that's
I think he was up there.
Bell South now, AT&T.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's the only one that came close to being in Nashville. And we lived there on Halls Lane, and Eddie Arnold had a farm kind of butted up against ours, a couple of horses, and he lived in Madison. And he was getting started. And it's kind of funny. There's a kid from Springfield named Kincaid, no relation. He used to be the Kincaid Potato Chip Company, and from his grandfather, and his father retired here, ended up in the Masonic home, but I think his name was David. He was a drummer, and he played with Eddie Arnold. Whenever Eddie Arnold got a gig, he'd call him, and you know, if it was Vegas, he'd fly him out to Vegas with his drum set, and they would play there, and he was getting $90,000 a day or whatever it was in Vegas. And I mean, the drummer wasn't, but he was playing all over wherever Eddie Arnold had a gig. So that was pretty interesting.
How were they connected? Do you know? Was your dad involved in any of that?
No, he must have backed up some band somewhere when he was a kid and got acquainted. And his name, I think, it's kind of like Hunter Biden, name of Kincaid. Maybe Maybe that opened a door for him. Who knows?
Yeah. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes that helps.
Hmm.
You were telling us also downstairs about the hound dog.
Oh, the hound dog guitar. His radio billing was Bradley Kincaid and his hound dog guitar. Well, the guitar came from when he was a boy. His father loved to had fox hunting. He loved to go fox hunting. He had some hounds, Old Blue and whoever else. But he had a friend that he went fox hunting with, and he had a guitar that he took when they would go fox hunting. I guess they'd be waiting for the dogs to tree a fox or whatever. No, a coon. but he traded one of his foxhounds for that guitar, and so it's a small guitar made in France. Actually, it ended up over here, and it's in the Kentucky Music Hall of Fame. If you want to go look at it, but it looks just like one. But he learned to play on it, and all the kids did kind of. And my grandmother evidently taught him some songs, and he learned those songs. Okay. And then when he was on WLS radio, WLS stands for World's Largest Store, Sears Roebuck. And so they were always looking for catalog opportunities. So they came up with this guitar, and it's got a logo of a hound dog going on a moon coming down over the mountain, whatever it is. And it's autographed by Bradley Kincaid, and it was in the catalog for $9.31, and sold them by the hundreds. And Guitar Player magazine did an article on the history of the cowboy guitars, because there was a Bradley Kincaid guitar, then a Gene Autry guitar, Roy Rogers guitar, all these things. My dad's was the first, or they're getting credit for that, the first cowboy guitar. So Sears took them out of their catalog a long time ago. Of course, Sears was out of the catalog business too. Come to think of it.
That's true. They're gone.
They are, yeah.
Times are changing.
And he was the first country western star.
He never considered it country western. It wasn't. He was the first radio folk singer, I guess you call him. But it began and became country music, And what he was doing was obviously music from the country, and he would go get these songs from the country. So, he should get credit for the first, and of course that's why he was at the first of the 10-hour series on country music, because he was at the beginning.
You want to take a break? Or?
Yeah.
The Madison Theater.
Really?
I was 15,
Yeah.
and I got $11 a week, and I did every night and double shoot 'em up on Saturday.
I guarantee you Jill went there. They grew up on Gallatin Road. Or not Gallatin, McGavick Pike. So Gallatin Road's kind of the main drag, and Gallatin was a bigger street off of Gallatin.
What did you call Old Hickory Pike?
Old Hickory Boulevard now.
Old Hickory Boulevard, yeah. Well, see that Hall's Lane, the connection between 31E and 31W was Hall's Lane, but it actually hooked up with Old Hickory Pike, I think, and goes around the city, does it? Or goes
Old Hickory Boulevard it circles the city.
Well, my Madison Theater story was, Tex Ritter was at our house having dinner with my dad, and I had to go to work at the Madison Theater, and I called back because that was the night I got promoted to assistant manager. for $13 a week.
How about that?
Yeah. But as I said, evidently there was a Tex Ritter connection. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
Of course, Gennett Autry was when my dad was on WLS. Gene Autry was just kind of struggling to get started. Although he was kind of on a regular, but not making any money. And they both of them got offers to go to Hollywood for screen tests. And my dad was making $3,000 a week at the Chicago Theater doing vaudeville, and to go out west and make those crummy movies and sing "I'm Back in the Saddle Again," whatever. So he didn't go, and Autry did, and he ended up, owning half of Southern California before he got done. So it was a missed opportunity, but they were both there.
Yeah.
And I remember when Autry was in Cincinnati for a show. I remember my dad went down to see him. And of course he knew Red Foley, and Red Foley is whose father? He was discovered on the Arthur Godfrey show, and he does TV commercials now for old people. Singer, Pat Boone. Pat Boone, Red Foley is his father-in-law.
Okay.
His wife's is Red Foley's daughter. So he knew Pat Boone. So he knew everybody from here and there.
Well, that was an interesting era in Nashville because there were a lot of these. It was more than just country music because you had Pat Boone that was just more contemporary music of the day, right? And Everly Brothers were kind of more contemporary, but then you had the country music going on as well. So must have been a really interesting amalgam of.
Well, I say Beasley. I can't remember who. He owns most of the recording stuff in Nashville, or he did. I can't. He was the house band at WSM. Why is his name gone? It hasn't come back to me yet.
You know, it's funny, all those radio stations, I didn't realize WLS stood for World's Largest Store because WSM was We Shield Millions. They were an insurance company.
Right.
Insurance, so it all stood for something.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what WWSO, the SO stood for Springfield, Ohio. I don't know, the WW was just call letters.
What did that become? Did it just go away?
WAVI Dayton, I don't know.
Is it still around?
Well, I think the frequency, it may be called something different now,
Right.
but it's 1210 on the AM dial.
Okay.
So, and my dad, summer job from college, let me disc jockey there on the radios. I was terrible. I really was bad. I don't know. I did not have the gift of gab when I was a college kid.
Yeah.
I still don't, but I'm talking pretty good today, right?
Well, you're being forced to.
Yeah.
Was it located in the old Lagunda Club?
The Gonda building, yeah.
I have a photo of it where they're either putting the sign up or taking the sign down.
The radio station?
Yeah.
Second floor there.
Okay.
Pretty nice studios, actually. Mostly played records, and Smilin' Bob was one of his first sales jobs. You know what I'm talking about? Bob Yance.
Oh yeah.
He was the Urbana rep, and he got $40 a week for being the Urbana rep.
Well, now you're getting into his area because his father did a little of that.
Right.
Yeah, WBOY.
Yeah.
What was it like for you to see your dad perform or to hear him on the radio?
To see him perform, you know, the early on it didn't faze me when I was young. I was just a kid. That's what he did. You know, it's his job. But I remember when he was 90 years old, going to the Fine Arts Auditorium there in Louisville. They had a program there to honor Grandpa Jones, the native son. And they brought the original trio, Grandpa, my dad, and Bashful Joe Troyan, the comedian, to do part of his show there. And my dad came out on the stage at 90 years old and sang Barbara Allen and didn't miss a lick. And you could have heard a pin drop in the auditorium and tear in every eye. I mean, it was amazing that he could do that at 90. And that did impress me. And he had just gone through a little heart attack issue, but to do that and get out on the stage and not be fazed.
I want to see the audience react.
They loved it, you know. Of course, he was basically an extrovert, and early on, I was very introverted. And he was always telling me, you need to become more extroverted. Well, you just don't become more extroverted. You are or you aren't, you know. So I was shy about appearing on radio and things like that. It was not a career I would have pursued in a bit, but I could have borrowed from his name. Maybe I could have gotten $50,000 a week or whatever it is.
I was just listening to Barbara Allen before I came over here.
Which edition?
It was an early one. It was an old Supertone record somebody had recorded, and you can
Very
still
high,
hear
yeah.
the clicking in the background.
Yeah. They came out with a 4 CD. You have that?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From England.
Yes.
Yeah.
Following all over.
I'm sure there were no royalties paid for that.
Probably not. Do you have a copy of it?
I do. I've
Yeah.
got 2, actually. My brother gave me one,
Okay.
which he didn't need.
Yeah. I haven't unsealed mine yet. I've been listening to the old.
But that's the early
stuff.
Gettner or Gennett
Gotcha.
recordings. Yeah. Yeah, they're very early.
Yep. So your father passed away here in town. He's buried in Ferncliff Cemetery. Is your mother buried here? As well?
Mm-hmm. Same place. They're on the Ferncliff tour.
Are they?
Yeah, because there's a plaque on his marker that we put on there.
So how many years did your parents live here then? So
Well, from they moved up here. I was a senior in high school. And that would have been 1950,
okay.
the year of the big blizzard.
Yes.
So they lived,
They didn't think twice about getting out after that.
I don't know, they might have, but the snow melted. But that was interesting. So I started in Springfield High School my second semester of my senior year, right after Thanksgiving.
Was that tough?
Yeah, it was. No, I made friends, but
Yeah.
and it was short-lived because I went to college, pretty soon after that. So you forget your high school people very much. But some people make high school friends they never forget, Your high school friends, where are they?
I have a few that I keep track of where they are, but a lot of them have scattered across the country.
Don't they? Yeah. And you just sing the alma mater and say, I'll never forget you, and sign those little pictures, and where do they go?
Yeah. Well, we just had our 35th anniversary, and people, we didn't have a huge class. I don't remember them at all. They tell me their name. I don't have any memory of you ever. So tell me about Oberlin. Were you kind of destined to go there since your mother was a grad?
I had not applied to college, and here it was May, and I wanted to go to Ohio State because that's where everybody was going. And my mother would have no part of it, and because she was an alumni, she made a few phone calls, and she was pretty close to the former president, who was the one who enticed her to go to Oberlin, or to Berea, teach. And I was enrolled at Oberlin. And I got an education there. I think I learned to think, maybe reason, but certainly not a vocational school. So I had no idea what to do when I got out of Air Force. I should have stayed in, maybe. I could have stayed. I liked the Air Force. It was a pretty good gig.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you came back and took over the
As it turned
music
out,
business.
I am too, yeah.
Yeah.
You obviously found Springfield to be an agreeable place to live, and raise a family.
Yeah,
Could have gone anywhere.
yeah. We had a lot of good friends early on, and couples. Nancy was junior service league person, and she loved those girls, and they were, we were all acquainted, had lots of social things, and I don't think they have that anymore, do they? I don't.
I don't
Junior
know that it
service league.
operates at the same level that it used to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so we did that, and our kids were young and having fun, so we did that. I learned a lot about the music business. I did get, I was on the board of directors at National Association of Music Merchants, which you might want to go to that website and get oral history, because I got about 50 minutes that was recorded and filmed at the piano plate factory. But had a lot of fun, made a lot of friends in the music business, so forth. And we belonged to an association of music dealers, which was a very close-knit group of about 12, 14 stores. And so we would go to a different store every 6 months and would critique that store and find all kinds of faults with it and talk about it. And talk about the real numbers. And, a lot of associations, you don't get to the real numbers. But we did the real numbers. And so we were always the smallest. Some of these stores are huge in volume. We were always the smallest one, but we were the most profitable one for some reason. So that's a good thing. I finally learned that you're supposed to make money in business, not be there for the goodwill of the community, although it's part of it. You want to make friends.
Yeah.
And I think our store has always had that reputation. You go and people come back, and I still see people, you sold me my first guitar, or you sold me my kid a clarinet, whatever it was. And I have trouble remembering people's names, but I can almost tell you what instrument they played. That's the business side of it, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. But we did have fun there. And I did that for 47 years. Long time. Long time. And when I started the music store, there were 7 music stores in Springfield of various kinds. So a lot of keyboard music, piano stores, and Snyder's Art and Music with sheet music store, and then Snap's Hammond organ studios, and when it finally got down to 1. The Moeller Music Company was there in the Myers Market building where their rehab, But that was the guy that sold my dad the music store. Eventually came back and he opened a store there. After he had a 5-year no compete clause, and 5 years was up, he was there. And so, and he
Obviously outlived him.
outworked
him.
I was in the right end of the business, the band instrument school service. That's probably the profitable end of the business, the cash cow, I guess you'd call it if you were going to economics. But that's where volume and dollars are.
We have a steady supply. Every year you got a group
Kids, yeah. And the band programs are kind of ebb and wane, but they Then you get a guy like Jim Kenton Ridge. Jim, what's his name? Comes up with a 150-piece band where previously there was a 25-piece band. You know, that's all leadership and charisma, and everybody wants to be in the band at Kenton Ridge, you know.
Yeah.
So those happen from time to time. So that kind of, and the music store now, they're doing a great job, and they are reaching out a lot farther than we ever did, with guys on the road out calling on schools, doing rental programs, things like that. Of course, the piano business has virtually died, except for Steinway, which basically makes institutional pianos is their biggest thing. Churches and institutions, or people want them to show in their front window of their house. You know, never played, but they're, what do they call those kind of piano showpiece? Yeah, yeah. Like this one never gets turned on once a year at Christmas. And the kids say, that's too loud, turn it off. You know. But the organ business died in the 80s. It used to be popular. Everybody played the organ, and we had a lot of business there. And then they came out with the Yamaha Clavinova, the digital pianos, and they filled a gap between the acoustic piano and the digital and the organs. So people buy those, and churches buy those, and we still sell a few of those, I guess. And what surprises me most now in the music stores, one of the biggest sellers is ukuleles. If you can believe that. Who was a guy years ago that played the ukulele and sang tiptoe through the tulips? You know, that was a long time ago, and we would sell ukuleles in our little toy department, you know, $5, $10 ukulele, and they were made out of cigar box materials. And now they're $150, $250. Electric ukuleles, you know, quality ukuleles.
Yeah, that was one of my first instruments because I got a good looking one, but it fit in his hands and he could start playing, and bought a little chord book, and
That's high-end ukulele.
it was a nice one. It was one of the Hawaiian ones that you had, I think, and you had a whole.
Yeah, there's a whole rack of them there.
Yeah, there was a rack in there.
Yeah. Well, they're basically the bottom four strings of a guitar. So, and then the fourth string is tuned an octave high. So it's not like it's an easy adjustment to go from there to guitar.
It was a money maker for him. He took it to school and he used to play it with the on recess. And he'd open his guitar thing up and tell anybody if they wanted to throw something in, they could.
Really? Take enough collections. That is funny.
Because he said, you know, when we travel, he'd see people do that, so he thought he'd.
Where'd he go to school?
Emmanuel Christian.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
good.
He didn't make much.
No. That is funny. But.
Well, any other questions?
Know any more details than what you shared with us?
Well, in the back of his book there, I think there's kind of a collection of well, you got the early songbooks. Most of those things were were copyrighted by my dad. And of course, they became later textbook material, like songs like Sweet Betsy from Pike and On Top of Old Smoky. And so he was getting royalties for all kinds of publications. But he was kind of smart that he did that, to copyright them, because they hadn't been copyrighted. They might have been popularly known, but never published, never copied. So he was the first to publish them. But he did stir up a lot of activity, I guess, when he would go to a town and people would gather around him and sing songs to him and things like that. You got the postcard of, yeah, that was originally two cabins 2 log cabins, roofed over in the middle, and then enclosed in, you know.
Huh.
It's not there anymore.
Is it not?
No, there's a roadside marker there that we put up for him,
Huh.
you know, a historical marker. But that's that Martin guitar I was telling you about.
Is that what it is?
You'd go by that, John. Go get that for me. I wish you'd like to get that for me. It's a beautiful guitar, as you can see.
Oh, yeah.
That's an original.
Well,
That's-
for somebody to be willing to pay that much money, it's obviously incredible value in it.
Well, no, but the problem is that if you go on eBay, all 0045 Martin 28 Martins are selling in that price range.
Oh, I know. That's what I mean. It's just
Yeah.
amazing.
It is amazing. I could have bought it back in the 80s for $5,000, and I thought, well, that was a stretch for me right then. So I didn't. That's number 1. That's the very first songbook. 50 cents would get you one of those.
Well, and I've got it. They came out in multiple colors, too, because I got a brown one. You got the kind of blue-green.
Well, you can see in here the number of printings.
Oh, yes.
Printed, how many times did this book printed? Yeah,
Yeah, this was
six times.
Yeah, this is the 3rd printing.
6 times in 1 year. And, it, you know, I don't know, was it 10,000 times or 50,000 copies or,
Well, no. I just in the reading that I did, they said his first one ultimately sold over 100,000 copies.
first issue, yeah.
Yeah.
And then they reprinted each time.
Well, he had multiple songbooks.
Yeah, but this one reprinted 6 times.
Yeah.
So they're saying the 6 printings of that was 100,000?
No, I think they were saying that well, I can't remember. I just remember they said that the first group of songbooks that he sent out had over 100,000 sold, and ultimately they said over 400,000.
So, well, that would be this one, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's an incredible amount of volume.
Well, it was then, and
I mean, I would say even today.
yeah. And which one is, this is number what? I don't know, but I have a collection of them down, most of them I have down there. They're not exactly numbered, but 1931, that would have been,
Pretty
this is number 2 or number 3.
Yeah. Yeah, most of the other ones are numbered. Although this one, yeah, this is book 2 actually.
I remember her, Natalie Giddings. She had a little Crosley automobile. You remember Crosley cars?
Sure. That was a Cincinnati product, wasn't it?
Yeah, when we lived in Madison, my dad came up with one of those, and I learned to drive. I would drive it back on the farms, and I would jump the creeks with it, and everything. Ended up the front axles were like that. 2-cylinder engine.
Wow. It's almost like a toy. So this is actually book number 2.
I drove it to work at the Madison Theater.
Well, it
That
worked.
was my go-to-work car. I'm not sure which one this one is.
That's the
Oh, this is book 2, it says.
Yeah.
So the other one, that must be book 3 then, because this was probably printed in, doesn't it say what year? 1929, book 2. Is this a reprint of number 1, just different cover?
I don't know. It looks substantially different.
Pro-
No, because it has a picture of.
That's WLS Barn Dance. Now he's in there somewhere. There's a picture like this, a big picture I had blown up in the Kentucky Music Hall of Fame.
Okay.
It's not in the, it's on the wall. It's not in the little niche of memorabilia. Yeah. He was very complimentary of these guys at WLS Radio. And Prairie Farmer Station. What's what's the Prairie Farmer comedian guy?
Yeah,
Is it still?
they just finally went away, didn't it? And they do their last episode a year or two ago.
Red Green?
That was old Wobegon. Mike Wobegon.
Garrison Keillor.
Garrison Keillor.
Yeah.
Prairie Home Companion.
Prairie Home. Okay. So how many you got total?
Well, I have 6 or 7 of them.
That's 13.
That's 13. Number 8.
Hmm.
I got 2 and number. It might be 9. This number 9, and then just a couple pieces of sheet music. Born to Lose and The Yellow Rose of Texas.
Yeah. I don't know how his picture got on those, except that BMI or whoever wanted to sell some sheet music.
It was marketing. It was marketing.
Marketing, yeah. I don't know if my dad ever sang those songs. I'm sure he never sang that Born to Lose. It was not a gentleman's game, publishing and records.
Yeah.
Well, you see the story, like Sinatra's records. He had his own stamping company, Reprise Records. That way he knew exactly how many records were being printed, and then he would sell them to distributors. So he had 100% accountability, since he didn't want any part of the regular payment. Because my dad recorded for probably 6 major companies: RCA, Decca, Bluebird, Brunswick. Name some other. Decca. Did I say Decca? Yeah. And Gennett.
Well, I think they were notorious, all that, because there's always been, even up into well, even now, obviously, because your royalties are, some of them are coming off of music, and now that everything's gone so digital, how do you really get paid, and where's the money going from all the online stuff, and who's counting it?
That's not accounted for.
Yeah.
I guess they can account more for performance kind of things, television and radio. And I think where they've kind of solved that is like every radio station pays a fee to BMI or ASCAP, or every
Well,
television
just like
station.
every bar, every store
Right.
that's playing the music
Yeah.
is supposed to do the same thing.
So that music's kind of divided out by. So my sisters and my brother and I gave the copyrights to Berea. So they get the royalties from whatever they were. They're not a huge number. It was $4,000 or $5,000 a year, I guess.
That's nice, though. With
Well,
this history there.
what were we going to do with them having to send 4 checks every quarter for 98 cents or $11.12 or what, just sort of divide it up by 4, it wasn't going to work.
That's
So
a
there
nice
we-
gesture.
Well, yeah. But my dad was just so thankful for Berea. Yeah. They changed his life. Well, the Lord changed his life, but they gave him an education opportunity that he took hold of and went from there. Distinguished alumni, he's got a plaque down there, alumni award.
Okay. No, it's a great place. My grandparents always, I know when I took over the foundation work, my grandfather always had sent checks down there.
Stay at the Boone Tavern.
I don't know if I've never stayed at the Boone Tavern.
Oh, you gotta do that.
I've never been down there, but I
Really?
know that we always sent checks down there. So he always, my grandmother always thought highly of what they did.
My dad, when I go in there, because I go to Berea, my cousin has a bed and breakfast there.
Okay.
It's called Doctor's Inn. He was a retired orthodontist, and my aunt, my father's sister, had a beautiful house loaded with gorgeous antiques and things like that. So they opened it up as a bed and breakfast. So if you ever want to stay in a beautiful bed and breakfast, it's called Doctor's Inn, Berea, Kentucky.
Okay.
But we go down and have stop by there and have dinner at the Boone Tavern, and I always go up to the clerks and say, "You like your job here?" And I said, "My dad had that job in 1922, before you were even thought of." He was
Worked for him, though.
He was night clerk at the Boone Tavern in 1922.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that story. But the amazing thing about that fourth grade education, I remember he was probably almost 90, and my sisters, his sisters were middle 80s, and they came up to see him. So they were all staying out there on Bird Road where he lived, and they were sitting around talking about what they learned when they were in grade school, and they could tell you, like kids learn all the capitals of the states of America. They could tell you the capitals, but they could tell you the rivers on which the capitals were, that they learned in fourth grade. And then they would recite. They didn't have books and things; they had to memorize. And he could recite poem after poem of poems that they learned when they were kids, classical poems, And of course, he had a fabulous memory anyway. And of course, he had, they said, a 300 song vocabulary. So that's a pretty good memory.
Sure is.
He could remember every bad thing I ever did, I think.
That almost comes with every parent.
He only spanked me once. I was a kid.
That you can remember, you mean?
Yeah.
Shoot. Well, Jim, we really, really appreciate you taking the time to
Gosh,
tell us a little bit of your story and your
Yes.
family. And
I appreciate that, the opportunity.
yeah,
Hope some of it will keep.
All of it.
yeah, I think so. I just think, over time, these stories fade away and people forget
they do.
about them, and then, a generation comes along that hadn't heard about it. It's like, wow, that's pretty cool. And so it's really piqued my interest, and hopefully we can give it a little more exposure and keep the story going.
Nice to be remembered.
Yeah. Good.
For sure. All done?
Thank you much.
Thank you, John.